All right, let's talk about Johnstone and Seymour Narrows and what happened there. We stayed the night in Campbell River. It was actually pretty cool. We left, back up a little bit, we left Ganges heading for Campbell River and headed across the straits, Georgia Strait. And when we came out of Dodd's Narrows, poked our noses out, it was about 13 knots of wind. It had to have been 15 knots or faster. I wouldn't have gone to Georgia Strait. I'd have waited. But I was like 13 knots, and all the forecast information was showing that the further north I would go, the less the wind would blow. So I was like, okay, so we're coming out of Dodd's Narrows, 13 knots of wind. It's going to slow down the further north we went. And we ended up meeting up with Anytime. So Anytime is another RT-27 outboard. We've known them for several years. We met them at the unofficial Range Tug Rendezvous a couple years ago. Anyway, he saw us passing by and got in his boat. He was going to leave at noon, but we were passing at 10, so he jumps in his boat. So we all meet together up in Campbell River. So Perry and I were looking at the weather forecast the next day. We each came to our own independent decision that it looked good. We were looking at 5, 6, 7 knots of wind in Johnstone. Seymour Narrows was a slack before flood at 7, and we wanted the slack before flood because we wanted the incoming tide into Johnstone's because the wind was coming from the northwest, right? So that way the wind and the tide would go in the same direction. So that should flatten down the seas, even if the wind picks up a little bit. All right, and it also meant for us we'd be going into the current, so we'd burn a little more gas, but we were fine with that because the sea state was more important. We wanted a flatter seas. So we get up in the morning, we're heading out. Sig lines off at 6. We go through Seymour Narrows. About 10 minutes to 7 is when we hit it. Seymour Narrows it's like Deception Pass, but way larger. And the current can run through there a lot faster than the Deception Pass. I want to say you can get like 13, 14 knots through Seymour, something like that. So you really need to go through Seymour at slack, which we did. And actually it was fine. It was overcast. There had a little bit of rain here and there. We went through there. And there were spots where we were in like some 2 and 3 footers that we probably shouldn't have been. And we're kind of questioning why it was that way. But anyway, as the day went, I mean, the sea state would be nice and flat, and then it would get lumpy, and we're in like 2 or 3 footers, and then it would get flat again, right? Well, so as you go through Seymour Narrows, you get Discovery Passage. We're going up through there, and then we come around the corner to get into Johnstone, and it started out fine, and then it just got worse and worse. My logbook I wrote down it was a day of hope, right? Because I'd look off in the distance, and I would see the white caps society. I'm like, oh, I hope that over there is better. And we get there and it was, and then we hit a corner or wait another 10 minutes, and then the conditions would change drastically again. And before we knew it, I mean, we were in 2 to 4 foot seas.
We're always hoping.
The period was actually, they weren't stacked really close together, but they were coming in from all directions. And once you're there, there's nothing we could do. So Anytime and myself, we were kind of zigzagging through the channel. I mean, we'd go look over, try the one side of the channel, try the other side of the channel, try the center of the channel. We were looking for flat water anywhere we could find on that, and there was just none to be found. And the boats would just crash through, and the water would come up over the top. As you guys have, I hope you've watched our video on that. I have really good footage of the 3 of us being tossed around. The good news is, inside the boats, none of us were afraid. It wasn't death-defying or scared or any of that.
It's bumpy.
Really what it was I was looking at my chart plotter, and it said 35 miles to Port McNeil, and I'm like, I got 35 more miles of this? Like, we're never going to get there, right? But anyway, we just kept sloshing, making our way through it. I tried doing 5 knots to see if that was any better. It didn't matter. 5 knots, 10 knots, 15 knots. There's times, I mean, we couldn't do 25 knots to cruise. It was too bad for that, but we were bearing our speeds and, trying, like I said, searching the channel, trying to find some flat water, some protection from anything. But what I've come to learn with Johnstone is predicting the weather in Johnstone is really difficult. First off, windy doesn't work. You can't use windy at all for that. You know, and I've talked to many other people that they've hit Johnstone and it was flat as glass. It was great cruising through there, right? But you know, Johnstone's fairly deep on water. I want to say it's like 600 foot mostly, but it goes down to over 1,000 in spots. And you just get all that water that funnels through there, gets choked back by Seymour, and then the canyon is so steep, the wind will come down and it'll just get funneled and it'll get compressed and speed up. And so anyway, about 9:30-ish, as we're getting tossed around in Johnstone, we're like in the worst of it at this point. Nothing we can do about it. And we're just all bouncing around. And I got so much water coming over, you know, anything. I mean, there was a couple things were leaking here or there that I didn't know that would leak, you know, kind of stuff. And then I started smelling this electrical smoldering. And it was really faint to begin with. And it was concerning to me, and I didn't know where it was coming from. But as the time went on, it got worse and worse. It would kind of come and go, and it definitely was related to the water falling on top of the boat, right? So if there wasn't water falling on top of the boat, the smell wasn't there. The more the water fell on the top of the boat, the more the smell came. And LaZina told me she was looking in the back, and she would see gallons and gallons of water running down. It would hit the bimini, roll off that, it'd hit our dinghy, and then it would roll forward. And she said the cabin door was shut, but she'd see water rush up against the cabin door and then roll into the cockpit, right? So anyhow, about 9:30 or so, that electrical smell all of a sudden went boom. It was strong, right? And I'm like, am I going to have an electrical fire in 4-foot seas? That concerned me. So I got on the VHF radio and I told Anytime and Lemon Drop I had a problem. It's like, I got to get out of Johnstone. I need the water to stop falling on the boat, and because I need to know where the smell's coming from now. I'd already looked at the charts. We were 3 nautical miles away from Port Neville, Neville. So I just went and beat feet and I cut across, straight across the channel for that, did like a 45-degree angle through the chop and got there. As soon as I got in the channel, I dropped the anchor, and it was like 15 knots sustained winds in the anchorage. I mean, the seas were flat in the anchorage, flatter, more bounced around, but it was blowing. So anyway, I dropped the anchor, and then Anytime came up, pulled up, and rafted to me on the starboard side. Lemon Drop rafted to me on the port side. So that was actually pretty cool, because I know my Rockness setup will hold 3 boats at 15 knots of wind. And then I tore the whole boat apart trying to find where the smell was coming from. We looked in the, went back in the cave by the 24/7 fuse. You could smell it. We opened up the center cockpit. It was really strong there. And then when I opened up that starboard lazarette, the smell just like, woof, this is the spot. And it was all the way aft. Well, in the aft section of the starboard lazarette, all that's there is the engine battery and my Victron 100/30 solar controller. And I looked at the Victron app on my phone. The solar controller worked. It showed up. I looked at the controller. It had a green light on it, which said it was powered on and working. I didn't see any scorch marks or anything right away. Nothing looked really bad. Kind of stuff. And the engine battery and all that worked. So it was like everything's functional, but the smell definitely was in that compartment. Right. The good news was the smell dissipated. So Perry and I got up. We looked at the charts and says, "What do we do different?" And what we decided to was we said if we go back out into Johnstone, we have about 10 more nautical miles to go, and then Port Harvey was there. We could hang a right into Port Harvey and get off the Johnstone Turnpike, as I said, right, and go up to the Browns. It's like a 10 or 15 mile extra detour. But that was the best thing we did that day.
I don't know. I kind of think the anchorage was the best thing we did right then.
But we got back out there, and the seas had flattened down a little bit. Little Elsie had actually stopped by. They actually saw us on AIS. So they came by and pulled in the anchorage to say hi to us. They watch our YouTube channel. Hi, little Elsie. Thanks for stopping by. Right? But when they went back out, they had told us they were going up towards Port Harvey as well. So they radioed back that the conditions were better. It was like 2-foot seas, not too bad. So we go back out there. We hugged the shoreline, and I told Anytime and Lemon Drop, I was like, I'm just going to go whatever speed I can to keep the water from falling on the boat. But I still didn't know where the electrical issue was, right? And that actually worked pretty well. And the sea states had calmed down a little bit in Johnstone to that 2-foot chop. So we make it to 10 miles, we can pull in Port Harvey, and it went flat as glass. And we hit the throttles, and we made up some time doing 25, 27 knots. And that was a gorgeous run up through there to the Broughtons and stuff up and around. And we ended up getting into Port McNeil about 3 hours later than we had anticipated. And we were all exhausted after that, right? Perry and I, anytime, we burned a ton of gas going through there. I mean, I was getting a mile per gallon, most of that through Johnstone, just in that sea state. One of the reasons why, when I do my fuel management, I always do it in a third to get there, a third to get back, and a third reserve. So really, I'm burning 100 gallons on a 150-gallon gas tank most everywhere I go. I usually don't go below that 50 gallons that's left, just for that reason. So, but anyway, we top off with gas in Port McNeil. We're looking for our weather window to cross Cape Caution, and I still didn't know what the electrical smell was at this point, right, or what would happen. So it wasn't until the next day. So we left, went up to Cape Caution, went through Cape Caution. Cape Caution was fine. Easy crossing on that for us, but a good weather window there. And just as we're getting ready to pull into Fury Cove, we're done with Cape Caution. I'm like, I want to take a hot shower when I get there. And whenever I run the hot water heater, I always make sure I got enough solar to help out heating the hot water. And we had lots of sun pouring into Fury Cove. And so I go turn the hot water heater on and look at the Victron app, pull the solar controller up, and solar is giving me 0 watts and 0 volts. And it never gives me 0 watts and 0 volts during the daytime. Even in cloudy, overcast skies, I will always see something. So having that I had sunshine out and I was at 0 volts from solar, I was like, there's my electrical problem. All right. So went back down, looked at the solar controller. What happened was the starboard lazarettes, there's scuppers on both the port and starboard lazarettes. The scuppers got clogged on the starboard lazarette. That caused them to overflow. We were taking on so much water over the boat going into the cockpit, it overflowed the starboard scupper and and I had literally running water across the solar controller. When we were in Port Neuville and I opened that starboard lazarette, it looked like you took a spray hose to that entire compartment on the back end. It was that wet, right? And obviously the bilge pumps, pumped the excess water overboard, and such, so all that was fine. But that starboard scupper being clogged was the root cause of this, and then the water just ended up running right across the solar controller. On those Victron 100/30 controllers, they have a fuse that's internal to them on the solar panel side, because normally, you're not required necessarily to fuse the wire that goes from the solar panel to the controller. And people may say, well, usually you fuse every conductor. Why would you not fuse that? Well, I've got 10 gauge wire. 10 gauge wire can handle 30 amps, and the short circuit volt, or the short circuit amperage for the solar panel setup I have is 8 amps. So if I short circuited the solar panels, it's going to hit 8 amps on a conductor that can handle 30. So that's not a safety concern. You're not going to cause an electrical fire on the conductor. So what Victron does is they put a fuse inside the controller for the solar panel side. It's not a user replaceable fuse. If the fuse blows, the entire unit's got to get replaced. And that's what happened to me. When I finally got down there and looked at the solar controller and stuff, you could actually see some brown scorch marks and stuff on the controller. The conductor actually was fine. There was no burnt insulation or anything like that. It literally was just the solar controller that shorted out on the solar panel side, because obviously the other side is the solar controller to the batteries, and that I have a 6 gauge wire. That does have a 40 amp fuse on it that I put in, that you ought to always have fuse, but the fuse is closest to the battery, not closest to the controller. And now that was fine. That's why the controller worked. It just wasn't able to, the solar side wasn't working. So now I'm in Fury Cove, sunshine out. We had 2 days of racing, get across Johnstone and Seymour Narrows and then across Cape Caution. So we're a bit stressed, and we had fantastic weather in Fury Cove. So the 3 boats, Anytime, Lemon Drop, myself, we all went and anchored in there in Fury Cove. We ended up spending an extra day there because it was so nice. And of course now I was like, where am I going to get a solar controller? I'm like on the 3rd day of our trip, and I don't have solar anymore. And where I'm going is all rural and all remote. So I got on my inReach and sent a message to friend Brian. I was like, he did this trip last year, and I was like, hey Brian, this is any ideas what stores there are in Shearwater or Prince Rupert that I might be able to source some of these controllers for? And he sent me a message back on inReach, which is satellite communication. He was like, I'll make some phone calls and see what I can find. And next thing I know, I get a message from Brian that said, don't worry, got you covered. Meet you. He says it'll be there in Prince Rupert for you. He knew the marina that I was going to stay at in Prince Rupert. I already had reservations there. And that was a godsend, and I'm so thankful to Brian for that, because it was like 4 days later is when we actually got to the marina in Prince Rupert, and I pulled in there and went to check in. First thing the harbor master says is, here's your box. And that was freaking fantastic. So it took me about a half an hour to go swap the old solar controller out, and I threw the other one in the garbage, and put the new one in, and it was back up and working. So the root cause was the scupper getting clogged. So to clean the scupper is actually pretty easy. All I do is I just take 2 rags. I'll take 1 rag, because you open up the scupper into the port of the starboard side. There's 2 holes, one forward, one aft. I take the rag and I stuff it down the 1 hole to block it, and then the other rag I wrap around the end of the raw water washdown that I have, and I just stuff that nozzle. I just do it full bore, full water pressure through. Whatever's in there, it'll blow out the back of the scuppers without any issues. And then I'll go back on the transom, take my hand down there and feel the flapper on the scupper, because sometimes I've seen some dog hair and stuff will get caught on the scupper, and that'll restrict the flow and not let the actual water exit it. I just do that a couple of times. It clears up easily. It's not a big deal, but I've been doing that now as part of a morning chore before we take off. Just to make sure.
This morning, and it was clogged.
Yep, this morning again it was clogged. Just having 3 dogs on the boat, especially Nuka. Nuka sheds quite a bit. So does Emma, actually. Corgi, she sheds more than you think she does. But when the scuppers are clean, then it just works. Like I said, that Port Lazarette had way more electronics in it than the starboard one did, and it went through Johnstone, obviously, and that Lazarette was bone dry, and the center Lazarette was even bone dry, other than the water in the bilge that had ran in from the starboard Lazarette overflowing. It'd be nice to put all that electronics in a secure location and stuff, but here in Canada it's a 27-foot boat. It only has so much space. So, but again, I'm super appreciative of Brian. He really came through. I didn't expect that. That was a really nice surprise, and forever grateful to him for that, because it really saved a lot of stress.
It saved a lot on our trip.
Yeah, because the solar is really important to us. I get engine charging on the battery, but so the way I sized channel surfing when I redid the electrical with lithium and the solar was I sized my house battery bank, which is a lithium battery, to let me do 2 days in the dark with no sun. That was the idea behind it. And I almost always will get something on sun. Even in the pouring down rainy days, I'll get some sun. But to give you an example, a pouring down rainy day, I may get 30 to 50 amp hours, which is about half. 50 amp hours, about half of what we use every day. If it's a full sunny day out, I may get 200 amp hours, 180 amp hours, right? Which is way more than we would use in a day, right? So a pretty big variance in that. That's why we did.
Thank goodness, though, you did that, because we're at Furry Cove for 2 nights.
Yeah, we did Furry Cove for 2 nights with zero solar, and we were fine. The morning I left, we were at 40. I think it was 49 hours. We did in Fury Cove with zero solar, just on the house battery bank, and I was at 39% when we left. And on my Lithionics battery, I can take it down to 10%. So I still have plenty of room to go. So that was really good. But on engine charging, I don't get a lot of engine charging. I've got a DC-DC charger that chokes it to 35 amps, which is really what you need to be, so I don't I don't overheat the alternator, making it work too hard. But the Yamaha's got a 70 amp alternator that outputs 50 amps, right? So it's just not a big alternator either. So generally speaking, underway I see 15 amps of engine charging. And with a 320 amp hour battery, it takes a long time to charge it off the engine charging. So solar actually gives us like about 80% of all the power that we use on the boat underway. So that solar controller is actually really important. Anyway, that's the story of Johnstone, the lessons learned going through there. Going back, I'm going to avoid most of Johnstone for different reasons. We've been through it. We know what it's like at its worst, and you know, if it was flat seas, we all know what flat seas look like. If I get lucky to find that, but we're gonna go and do Dent Rapids and stuff instead, just because it's different, haven't done it before, it's more interesting, and we want to travel through the Broughtons a lot more too. Because that detour we took off through Port
really
Harvey,
pretty.
you know, and Havana Channel stuff, that was really nice, really pretty and beautiful and stuff up there. So we want to do more of that. Cool, and thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button, because that really helps us out a lot.